The Union defeat at Bull Run on July 21, 1861, was followed by a poorly managed retreat that soon turned into mass panic within General McDowell's army. As soldiers streamed uncontrollably towards Centreville, discarding their arms and equipment along the way, McDowell ordered the division of Colonel Dixon Miles to act as a rear guard, but it was impossible to rally the army short of Washington. In the disorder that followed, hundreds of Union troops, wagons, and artillery were captured. Expecting an easy Union victory, many of the wealthy elite from nearby Washington, including congressmen and their families, had come to picnic and watch the battle. When the Union army was driven back in running disorder, the roads to Washington were blocked by panicked civilians attempting to flee in their carriages. The dark, stormy morning of July 22nd found thousands of McDowell's men stumbling into Washington, soaked and famished, collapsing in doorways, and roaming the streets. Which brings us to the subject of this episode. The woman who wrote this letter witnessed these throngs of demoralized soldiers enter the capital from her comfortable quarters in Willard's, the city's most affluent hotel. Her name was Isabella, and she was a socialite who rubbed shoulders with politicians and dined at the British Embassy. Isabella wrote this letter to her brother, George Clifford Esquire, who was staying at the New York Hotel in New York City, and it's possible these siblings were part of the influential Clifford family, who lived in New Bedford for generations, and whose members included John Henry Clifford, a prominent lawyer, Massachusetts Attorney General, and one-time governor. Willard's Hotel, Washington, July 26, 1861. My dear George, thanks immeasurable for your very interesting letter received on Sunday morn of last. The wedding seems to have passed off very pleasantly, and I trust that Mr. and Mrs. Eastman will have a very happy career. Your visit at New Bedford was marred by your sickness, I fear, yet I feel glad you were with those who would take fond care of you instead of being among strangers in your own rooms in New York. We hear you have had a large share of excitement in New York, and that people have felt anxious for the safety of their friends here. So we are of course expecting that our friends there have been in a state of alarm on our account. It is satisfactory to be able to report of our own safety so far, but I regret to say that among the killed and missing are several persons whom we knew well. We were accustomed to seeing Colonel Cameron almost daily, and Mr. Byng, a German, was very often one of our party. The latter accompanied Senator Foster and Mr. Ely to the battleground on Tuesday morning. And the senator is the only one who has returned, and he escaped through the woods. The other two were last seen surrounded by a body of the Virginia Black Cavalry. I want to pause here for a moment, because Isabella has just mentioned a few very important people in passing, the first being James Cameron. James was the brother of Simon Cameron, the Secretary of War, and he was also colonel of the 79th New York, one of the first regiments to arrive in Washington after President Lincoln's call for troops to put down the rebellion. The 79th New York went into battle on Henry House Hill at Bull Run, where Colonel Cameron led several failed charges to recapture cannons from the Confederates. He rallied his men again and again, leading them back into the smoke and lead, until a bullet struck him in the chest. Colonel Cameron fell to the ground and bled to death in a matter of minutes. His brother Simon was among the spectators who came out to watch the battle. Other spectators included Senator Lafayette Foster of Connecticut and Congressman Alfred Ely of New York, who were among a large group of civilians that left Washington to watch the battle from Centreville. But all they could see of the fighting was gun smoke rising above the distant treetops. Wishing to find a better view, Senator Foster and Congressman Ely decided to travel westward along the Warrenton Turnpike with a small group that included London Times correspondent William Howard Russell, Senators Ben Wade of Ohio, Henry Wilson of Massachusetts, and photographer Matthew Brady, to name a few. They came to a hill behind Brigadier General Daniel Tyler's division, but were soon caught in the stampede of retreating Union troops. Senator Foster managed to escape, but Congressman Ely became a prisoner of the 8th South Carolina Infantry. He would spend 5 months in Richmond's Libby prison. Only those who were present could form a true idea of the excitement and confusion that prevailed in this city from Saturday until yesterday. Comparative quiet now reigns. Still, the town is full of straggling soldiers, and it is wonderful that we should not in consequence see more serious results than have yet occurred. Early on Monday, 90 fire zouaves came to the hotel in the pouring rain and were refreshed by a good breakfast. They doubtless behaved bravely so long as they stayed on the field. But like too many more, they fled, and contrary to all military rules, numbers of them walked into Washington in different parties, receiving from many persons much sympathy, whereas they were in reality deserters. But one cannot blame the soldiers, when it is recollected that the officers were wanting who could lead the army forward. I suppose few of those who went from here knew anything of the ground on which they made the attack, whilst the enemy had 5 or 6 weeks to study their positions and prepare their batteries. Another thing, they were rested and refreshed for fighting, whilst the Federal troops were almost worn out with fatigue and heat at the onset. Doubtless much wisdom has been gained by this seemingly unfortunate engagement, so that good may eventually rise out of it. Yesterday we saw some of the prisoners at the old Capitol, a melancholy sight. Brothers holding brothers in bondage on each side of the lines. It is all so shocking. And we hear of so many inhumanities practiced on the wounded in Virginia that it makes one sick at heart. I have been longing to get away from here for the last week, and cannot imagine what induces Lady G to stay. We dined at the British Embassy yesterday, and of course war was the topic of conversation. Scarcely any other is even brought forward. Mr. Russell of the London Times sat on one side of me, and gave us his relations of the horrors he witnessed on the field of battle. Mr. Brady was at the hotel yesterday, and told me several startling truths, but I will no longer dwell on the subject. The newspapers speak quite enough horrors. No day is fixed for our going away. As the next engagement is expected at Harper's Ferry, perhaps we shall not linger in Baltimore. In that case we may reach New York next week, where I trust we shall find you. I am pleased to find your plans are progressing favorably, and I hope you will be able to see peace restored in this country before your departure to other lands, or even for San Francisco. Accept kind remembrances from Lady G, and believe me, your affectionate sister, Isabella. P.S. Did your San Francisco friend come to Washington? We have not seen him. I must tell you that Governor Sprague behaved most nobly on the field. He had one horse shot from under him, and another wounded. P.S. Number 2. I forgot to say we have had one amusing adventure by staying out after the countersign had been issued. And though we had General Mansfield's son, and a member of Congress with us, we should have had trouble in passing the sentinels, had not General Dix had the forethought to speak of the possibility of our being late on the road. An incident of war. Northerners were shocked and demoralized by the unexpected defeat at Bull Run, and it soon revealed the lack of training within the Union Army, and a need for a change in leadership. The battle was a humiliating and pivotal moment in American history. It filled the Confederate Army with a false sense of accomplishment, and paved the way for Lee's first invasion of the North. It also became the butt of many jokes and cartoons. This cartoon in particular was drawn by Frank L. Moore, a young schoolboy, and he sent it along with a letter to his cousin Charlie Kelly on September 12, 1861. It reads, "To the most dishonorable, disgusting, mucilious, short-haired, good-for-nothing Prince Charlie, this patriotic, unionistic letter is most patriotically, unionistically, humbly, obediently, disrespectfully, red, white, and bluely, emptily, picturely, newsily, givenly, dedicated, and given by the most patriotic, toothbrushless, unionistic, sore-eyed, disobedient, sore-toed, funny Frankie." Now that's a mouthful.